Hello, my name is Brandon Board, and I am the Information Services Librarian at AMBS. This is the last in our series of videos helping you walk through the process of writing a paper. And up until now, we've taken a lot of time making a plan to write a paper. We've talked about sources and bibliographies, outlines, and introductions. Now I want to give you some things to think about as you begin the process of actually writing. As we've done in previous videos, I'm drawing heavily from Turabian's advice on writing. I've said it before, but this book is extremely helpful, especially if you're finding that you don't quite know where to begin. It's not just for citations. And we have several copies of this book in the library, so feel free to stop by and grab a copy, or if you can't come into Elkhart, ask us and we're happy to scan sections of it for you. We'll be covering content from different parts of chapters 6 through 11 today, where Turabian takes you through the process of writing and revising a paper. Okay, so now you're actually ready to sit down and write. I've got a few pieces of advice for you to consider as you go about creating your first draft. First, it's important that you develop effective writing habits. Now, what exactly do I mean by effective writing habit? Well, I can tell you one thing that it is not, which is don't wait until the last minute and rush through the whole paper the night before it's due, hopefully having a few minutes to proofread the next morning. Instead, if you can, start early and work regularly and often. Instead of marathon writing sessions, set small goals for yourself and stick to them. You don't even need to write the whole paper in order. If you get stuck on one part, you can move to another section and come back to the first section later. Second, as you're going, you need to make sure that you're engaging your sources appropriately. And by that I mean that you are quoting, paraphrasing, and summarizing appropriately. Now, some people have a hard time knowing when to do what, quote, paraphrase, or summarize. So let's talk a little bit about why you would do each one of these things. Summarization is helpful when you want to quickly state a source's argument, but the finer details of that argument aren't so important, or the source itself has some interesting things to say, but isn't really worth giving much space in your actual paper. Paraphrasing, on the other hand, is where you're essentially restating another author's ideas in your own words. Usually we do this because you can state the argument more clearly or concisely than the original author. You may also want to do this when you find that the author's idea is the important part, but that his or her specific words are not that important. And finally, we have direct quotations. And there are 4 reasons that you might quote directly in a paper. First, the words themselves, the specific words that the author used, are evidence that back up your reasons. Second, the words themselves come from an authority who backs up your claims. Third, the words are strikingly original, or they express your ideas or your concepts more compellingly than you could yourself. And finally, especially if you plan to disagree with a source, you may want to quote directly to avoid misrepresenting what that source has said. One other thing to keep in mind as you write is to be very careful to avoid plagiarism. Plagiarism happens when you take someone else's work or ideas and pass them off as your own. And here's the tricky thing. Plagiarism can be inadvertent or accidental, but that doesn't make it okay. You must be very careful to always give credit to other authors when you're using their words or their ideas. So here are a few things to remember as you're writing to help you guard against inadvertent plagiarism. First, signal every quotation even when you cite the source. And by signal, I mean put it in quotation marks. If you're quoting directly, you must show the reader that these are not your words. Second, don't paraphrase too closely. Put things in your own words rather than just changing out or rearranging a few words here and there. And finally, always cite a source when you're using an idea that is not your own. It's also important for you to remember that a first draft is not the same thing as a final draft. You will likely need to review and revise your draft before you submit it, so make sure you leave enough time for revisions between when you're writing and the due date. Here are a few things to consider as you review your first draft. First, check for blind spots in your argument. Have you considered potential counter-arguments your readers might have? Have you looked for evidence that challenges or complicates your reasoning? Have you considered alternative interpretations to your evidence? Because your readers are going to do all of these things, and strong writing addresses these concerns as you're going. Second, make sure the body of your paper is coherent. It should be easy for a reader to know how each section relates to the one before it, what role each section plays in the whole paper, and the main point of each section. Third, check your paragraphs. They should be relevant to the main point of their part of the paper. Once you've done that, it's time to polish it up. Read your paper one more time to fix errors in grammar, spelling, punctuation, And while spell check is a useful tool, you shouldn't rely on it entirely. It's not perfect and can miss errors. And finally, it's time to turn it in. Knowing when to stop writing and revising can be one of the hardest things about writing. Everyone wants a little more time to revise, organize, and perfect what they've done, but really you're never going to write the perfect paper. So look through your paper one last time, make sure it looks the way you want to, page breaks, spacing in the margins, positions of tables and figures, etc. Make sure they all look good and turn it in. So that's a lot of information, but I hope I've given you some useful things to think about as you're writing. One thing to keep in mind is that Carl and I, as well as our writing services team, are all here to help at any point in this process. You don't need a finished draft to come to us for help. We're happy to help anywhere from the planning to proofreading stages, right up until the time that you turn it in. So good luck and happy writing.